me. My name is Lawler-Muzquiz, and I'm here with Innovation Nation. We have our first episode of our series, and today I have Rick James with me. Rick, please say hi.
Hello, nice to see you.
Nice to see you too, Rick. So, quick background on me. I've been in the integrator side of the house for 5 years now. I just joined a new company called Alcatraz, but been in the industry for about 6 years now almost. And we are doing this series because we want to talk about all the new technology we're seeing today, where the direction of the industry is going. And I have Rick with me, who's going to talk about a very important topic that I believe he's extremely versed on and really, really good at simplifying and explaining first for our viewers. So before we start, Rick, if you can please introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about who you are.
Sure. So my name is Rick James. I've been in the security technology industry for about 7 years in a sales role and really working on large mission critical complex systems for the majority of that 7 years. I now work for an integrator named Blue Violet. We focus in California and large campus size installations, but I've always been a nerd with technology and just trying to stay at the forefront of it as it continues changing is as you know, a very fun mission to be involved with.
Absolutely. And one of the things to our viewers, just so everybody knows, when I first met Rick, he really stood out to me as somebody that was at the forefront of technology who really just gets it. And on this topic, we're going to talk about, I kind of wish I knew Rick a long time ago. I feel like it would have been very beneficial having you by my side back in the days. But the truth is that, we all meet for a reason. And I think that, the direction of this industry is going to be very vital to our, actual environment when it comes to safety. I mean, where we're going as an industry is, to a place where I feel is new for a lot of people. And I think that there's a lot of concepts we're seeing, especially related to COVID-19. Rick, part of my past life, I was, exploring lots of different technologies as a response to COVID-19. And one of the technologies that came up a lot, was this frictionless access control environment and how we can accomplish that. And, there's a lot of tech that we know about already, whether it's facial recognition, analytics, we have cloud, we have all these different types of ways that we can use tech to get a good, safe, and secure environment and, kind of keep up with where the industry is going. But at the same time, what I've noticed is that as we're evolving, people are still confused or they're still, or potentially, don't fully understand some of these new concepts and how we use facial recognition versus facial authentication. And Rick, if you can help us out with really understanding the difference, let's start there.
So facial recognition and facial authentication. Probably the best way to describe that is facial recognition is about keeping profiles and kind of data logs on individuals that may be in or outside of your business so that you're using video to recognize their face. And then you're doing something with that, but you're keeping that data. You're keeping their, their PPI or their PHI, their private personal data in a database somewhere in order to recognize that person and then do something with it. Facial authentication is just using the face itself as a biometric. And there's a big difference between the two because for facial authentication, you're not keeping all of that PHI. You're just using that like the way that biometrics work right now in kind of the old way, the facial recognition way in a sense, is that when you go up to a fingerprint reader and you put your finger on it, ideally that fingerprint reader is not keeping your PHI, but what it's doing is spitting out an algorithmic output like 21 or 25, let's say for simplicity, to where that becomes your identifier. So when you go up and you put your thumb onto the biometric reader, I guess I should do this. It's identifying you not by your thumb because it doesn't want to keep that data, but by what your thumb identifies you as mathematically almost. That's what facial authentication is doing as well. It's using that face to open a door for you, but it's not keeping all of that data in a database somewhere. So you don't have to worry about storing it or protecting it or GDPR or, California protection regulations, anything like that. And that's a very big difference between the two.
Absolutely, Rick. And every time I have you explain that to me, I feel like I'm enlightened because the way you explain it makes so much sense. And I think that one of the things that, our industry is being challenged with is there's a lot of technology right now that's making claims or creating white papers or going out there and saying, we do this, we do that. And, I personally have been, you know, challenged with this because I still don't think our industry really understands the difference. Would you agree or would you disagree?
Well, I think that the end users and consumers in our industry and the buyers have a very difficult position because for some of them, this is their life, right? Security technology, they're a CISO or a CSO, and they own the risk for an organization. And so they're a little more up to date, but many of the end users and the clients that I deal with are not on top of the technology, and they're more reliant on someone like myself or an account executive or sales engineer to come in and explain that. So I do agree with you. I think that our industry maybe needs to do a better job of conveying the reality of the situation, which is that facial authentication is generally used in a way that is more frictionless, more smooth, has less ongoing maintenance, and is generally a simpler technology and installation rather than this giant facial recognition, which is a 800-pound gorilla in the room that needs to be identified, understood, and really a plan needs to be put around facial recognition if it's going to be used in an organization. So I do agree with you. I think there's a major gap between many new emerging technologies and what users truly believe that they are and how they work.
Well, I like that point you say because you're talking about when one of the points you just made was understanding those differences. And, I think, Rick, if we want to take, the concept of facial off that, right? And we just talk recognition versus authentication. Those concepts in and of themselves are very different. And I think it's interesting because you have a lot of different technologies from a software perspective, whether it's computer vision, machine learning, all these different analytic platforms out there, right? That are authenticating faces. Is that true? Is that indeed correct? The ones that we're seeing right now, a lot of them are doing authentication, or are they doing recognition, or is it both?
I'm seeing both.
Okay.
I look at some of the older technologies, and a lot of the older technologies are doing more of a recognition in a sense, right? They're keeping a database, they're keeping logs for when a face was used or a biometric was used, or even if you think about simple access control, there's full logs and access logs for who used what to get into what door. And that's kind of the recognition side of it, is that there's a back end, there's almost an auditable back end that says, here's what happened. Whereas authentication is interesting because most, I feel, users want those logs. They want kind of the comfort of having something that says, this is how this system worked, and here's kind of how everything went down. But authentication can be used more frictionlessly because if you're just worried about doing a thing in the sense of, for authentication, you don't want to keep all of this PHI, and you just want, in the case of the product that I have in mind, you want a door to open via someone's face in a frictionless, simple way so that when they walk up, it opens and they, are able to enter the building and be authenticated. I guess to answer your question, there are a lot of people that are using authentication, I think, recently, because it's really kind of blown up in the industry in terms of a viable option to accomplish a couple different things. But both recognition and authentication have been used around biometrics really, in the 15 years that I've done research on this, going back into the 70s, these types of things were used.
Yep. Well, it's interesting that you say that because I remember when I was just starting in my career and some of the technology I was exposed to, thank you to some of the amazing coaches that have, led me and exposed me to all the different tech we can do from a security perspective. We were exploring a few different options. I remember we were at a big stadium. There was a big, we're at an old stadium and they were building a new one. And one of the concepts we were thinking about then, this was about 3 or 4 years ago, was, frictionless entry from the courts to the locker rooms for the players, for the, sports players. And I think for this one, it was a basketball arena. And it was very interesting because at that time we were testing out the facial recognition. And what I remember was we were thinking the way we were trying to do it was we have facial rec, we put a camera right above kind of the hallway, the entryway where the tunnel is to go out of the actual arena main court. And the camera would, quote unquote, scan the face, recognize the person, and then indeed know, okay, this is a player who's allowed to go into the locker room, and the card reader would unlock. Or if we didn't have a card reader, we would have it tell the ACP, the access control panel, that that person's authenticated, right? This back end communication, and then that would go tell our door hardware, right? Our locks to open and close. And it was interesting because when they were explaining it to us, they were trying to use the idea of LPR, license plate recognition. And license plate recognition has been around for a very long time. So I just thought it was interesting because now, fast forward to today, we have so much different technology. And I think what I'm seeing is that there's a hump, and it's hard. We're having a hard time getting over that hump and realizing that there's truly a difference between the two, between authenticating, recognizing, how we recognize via like an analytic platform or just at the edge in a camera. I mean, there's so many intricacies around it. And I'm just noticing a lot of interchangeability of the terms. People are calling a facial auth device a face rec device, or they're calling facial auth a face rec. And then they're thinking from a use case perspective, it's creating concerns because the owners of the buildings are saying, well, I don't want to know what the color of these people's hair are. We don't want to keep their names and store all this because that's a privacy issue. Or if it's a healthcare facility, you have HIPAA. There's all these different things that start triggering the end users to think that it's a scary solution when really it's not when it comes to facial authentication. Do you mind sharing with me a little bit, Rick, like from your perspective, and I want to keep it product agnostic. I'd like to understand a little bit more around your experience with like creating a solution for the end user as the integrator, and what the steps you'll typically follow when you're trying to put something together, specifically in this use case when it comes to this frictionless facial auth versus rec solution.
Sure. So to make sure I'm understanding what you're asking, use cases around facial recognition versus facial authentication.
Yeah,
right?
And what are the steps that you'd usually follow, like as the integrator, to make a decision on what makes sense or what's better versus the other?
So the first thing I want to do is, before I address that, give kind of another example that may be a little more clear than my previous example on facial authentication and facial recognition. So think about a casino. A casino that has many high rollers, where when these high rollers come in, they want to be identified that there's a high roller that's in the building. They want someone to be able to come up to them and say, sir or miss, welcome back. We've got a table waiting for you. We set up a room in one of our suites, really give them the red carpet treatment. So in a facial authentication type of technology, you can have this person that has been identified or enrolled in the system to where you get a simple alert. And again, it's not going to have his name or her name or hair color or any identifier that's personal information about them, but it may spit out this algorithmic output that identifies that person. Again, if their fingerprint or the polygons in their face are identified to say I'm green or I'm 25, whatever that looks like as a number or a color, just as to use that. Basically, you're only going to get that color or that number to identify that person. And you might be able to tie that into a name on the back end for like a security operations center, whoever the end user is, to identify that person, or maybe you make a chart for it, whatever. But the difference with facial recognition or for recognition in general is that when that person walks in, they're saying, that's Sarah. Sarah is here. And here are the things that we know about Sarah. And these are stored in a database that are on our property that we are in charge and responsible for maintaining. That's the main difference as I see it between the two. So does that kind of better answer? I think that might be a little better of an example than the one previously given.
Yeah, I think what we're trying to get at here is just that the type of information and truly the data that we are interacting with, that the system is taking commands from, right, where we're creating the profiles for those people, the data around the people is different, and how we're interacting with it is different, and how we're using it is different. And that's key for people to realize that, because a lot of the times too, and I do still want you to answer the other question, but people will say, oh, well, what if they have a beard and then they shave the beard? Or what if they have glasses? I know, right? If you did that, Rick, shave your beard tomorrow, is it still going to recognize you or authenticate you? Or
most people would not recognize me.
I'm sure I wouldn't, but no, I guess the point is though, you know, it's like people are, maybe it's naivete. I don't know. Maybe it's a lack of education and knowledge. I don't mean that in a mean way. I mean in a way of where this technology is evolving and it's evolving really fast. And naturally, we're going to associate it with things we already know. And we're going to try to find ways to understand it with other use cases that we're already familiar with. And I think it's just very interesting. It's a very, you know, I'd say, what's the word for it? Controversial like topic, to be honest, because people, like I said earlier, are scared of it. They're scared of facial recognition. Facial recognition has been around for a very long time. And so where I'm going at with this is I'm noticing people assuming facial auth means facial rec, and then they're shying away from that because they think that it's going to be taking data just like the facial rec system might be. And also, just to take it a little one step further, and I'm going to let you finish your next question. We don't have too much more time here, but facial rec, from my understanding, and tell me if you agree or not, Rick, is usually associated with our VMS, our video management system. And we're typically like pulling from cameras and laying the software over cameras and interacting with that at the head end on the video side. Facial auth or biometric authentication is more so likely going to sit with your access control. And the way we're going to interact with those decisions and the decisions being made based on the person and authenticating their face is within access control, getting in and out of doors. And I think it's just very interesting because when you look at some of these white papers today in 2020 post-COVID as a response to COVID too, I'm seeing a lot of things coming together where they're saying they do both or they do the same or they bring it together. And I'm just having a hard time with that, you know, because they're very different concepts. And to me, that's a software that you're reliant upon that software. It's an API and an integration. And what happens if that binding breaks? What happens if one of the systems upgrades and the other doesn't? And now you have this back-end software that can't talk to each other, that won't allow those systems to still accomplish like what we're trying to get done. So I guess as a segue into that original question, like when you're looking at these solutions, Rick, and you're going to your end user, I know every use case is different, right? Every application is going to be different. But how do you usually make the decision as the integrator? Like, you know, I think, Mr. Customer, this is something that will be good for you, and I'm willing to put my name to that.
Well, the way that I approach that conversation with a client is, what do they want to do? In terms of what do they want the technology to do? What function do they want it to serve in the organization? And how do they want to maintain that? If I'm starting with, and by the way, I do agree. I think that most authentication style biometrics are sitting within the access control system or are, you know, tightly integrated to the access control system at a minimum. I think that most repositories of data that come from facial recognition are more on the video side. And there's a couple really good examples of that I'll bring up. But the use cases that I'm seeing for either, in a sense, because I think facial recognition is facial authentication with a whole bunch more, but the opposite isn't true. You can't be facial recognition and be facial authentication. It doesn't work that way, right? It's much larger than the part. So what I'm seeing is that for facial authentication, it's great to add a factor of authentication, right? It's great to go beyond a card. It's great to, you know, have an additional biometric that you can add on so that not only do you have, you know, a specific card that you're using for access control, or you're using your password or a PIN code, you can use your face, you can use a thumb to really make sure that the person that is utilizing, you know, getting access, whether that's physical access or digital access, that person is who they say they are at the time that they're using it and things are being used correctly. So authentication can do that as an extra level of an extra factor and works really well with other technologies. So the way that I see facial authentication being used right now is for perimeter doors. It's phenomenal if you want to remove individuals from having to use the card, or you want to up your security by adding card, PIN, and, you know, face to make sure that someone that stole a card or spoofed a card and then, you know, was sitting in the lobby room and watched someone else put a PIN in after they spoofed their card, that they still aren't going to be able to use that credential. And that's phenomenal, right? You see this with C-level executives and trying to get into their rooms. They want the extra security, but they also want this sleek technology that shows really well. And kind of, I would imagine, not that I've been an executive, but makes you feel like a little more of an executive when you walk up and your door opens for you. Like, that's really great treatment. And I also see this for IDF rooms, for any rooms that has sensitive data, is you want to up the level of security in your organization for those places that have restricted access. And that's where authentication, additional factors, and facial authentication specifically works very well. For facial recognition, the way that I think about the use cases for facial recognition is, what are you going to do with all of that data that you're gathering? And what's your use case for that, right? If you're a casino, you may not need that, strangely enough, because you don't need to know the details about that person. You just need to be alerted that your high roller is in the door and your team should respond to go take care of that person. I think about, for facial recognition, I am largely thinking about law enforcement agencies that are aggregating data, just like LPR. Right? License plate recognition technology is taking data off of cars and checking that against a database of criminality, of saying, okay, well, we have this identifying factor. What else can we find out about this person so we can ideally keep people safe?
Yes.
Right? And that's a very good tie over to how facial recognition is working. I think people nowadays, and rightfully so, in my opinion, right? I'll put on my tinfoil hat a little bit and, reference Skynet, but people are worried about this 1984 Orwellian technology state where everyone is going to be identified all of the time. And that's going to be tied into, the metadata of who they are as a person. And this, Vice did a great piece in China where they talk about how facial recognition is being used, where an individual jaywalking across the street, before they get across the street, their face is being identified, their state given ID is being pulled up, and they're being shamed on this public board that's saying, look at this person jaywalk across this street. And it's a great video. I know a lot of people have seen it, but that's what
you sent to me, right? I think
that's the one that I sent to you.
Yeah,
that's kind of the fear that people have with facial recognition. Is I'm going to be identified for who I am at all times. There's going to be nowhere to hide. And that's good and bad, right? I think that the counterexample is, if you're not doing anything bad, you have nothing to worry about. And forgive me, I forget who said this, but it's those who give up their freedom for security deserve neither, something along those lines, right? Once you give up that freedom and you're in a database and you're in a system and you can be tracked, the problem is that I don't think a lot of people think that that responsibility could be held by anyone and not be abused. So facial recognition, for me, it really depends on what an end user or a client wants to do with that information and how they're going to use it. But there's definitely a lot more that comes with maintaining the database of all of that information for all of the individuals that you're using facial recognition on.
Yes. Rick, I want to thank you, because the way you've explained this, and I think that the way you've described, the use cases and how we can actually utilize the two different technologies has been spot on. Everybody, to all the viewers and listeners here, I just want you all to know, Rick James is an amazing thought leader. So if you guys ever want to reach out to him, you can find him on LinkedIn. We're also going to post that link of that video he referenced. It's actually a pretty cool video to watch. It's on YouTube. And unfortunately, we are running out of time. So what we're going to do for everybody listening is I plan to have Rick visit us again. We are going to come up with some other cool topics. And if you're open to that, Rick, in the next series, I'd love to have you as part of the conversation. And for those of you who would like to learn more, like I said, we are going to put Rick's name on the post. So when you see it on LinkedIn, please reach out to him. He has so much information, and I really believe Rick will be very good at helping you, whether you're an end user, a customer, an integrator, whoever it is looking for more information. I've learned a lot from you, Rick, and I really appreciate all your time.
Yeah, I appreciate the opportunity to be on, this show and this podcast. And I want to say as well, I don't have all of the answers, but I love to talk about security. So if someone does reach out to me, there's a really incredible security community on LinkedIn and in kind of these different groups. So for anyone that's out there that does have questions, I'm happy to help. I'm also happy to point you in the direction of some really incredible professionals in technology that may answer your question better than I ever could.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Rick. And just so everybody does know, a lot of, lately I have been pinging Rick a lot, and he's been educating me tremendously on some of the technology we're seeing right now. So I'm excited, Rick, to continue working with you. I'm excited for everybody to meet you. And I really want to thank you again for being the first person to be on our podcast and to be on this show. And we're really excited to keep it going. So thank you for all your time.
It's a privilege. Thanks for setting this up and excited to see where it goes.